Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Geof, for being with us today. And thank you for those of you that are tuning in to The Heart Work. This is The Heart Work with Marty Martin. I'm glad to have you on board with us. The Heart Work, we're celebrating our racial diversity while building and fostering racial harmony, one conversation at a time. And we know that heart work is hard work, but it's not impossible. And I'm grateful and honored today to have as my guest today in today's conversation, one of my former bosses, and also colleagues in education, Geof Martin. So welcome, Geof. Thanks for being with us today. When we used to work together, I was his vice principal and he was Principal Martin. I was Vice Principal Martin, and I would introduce when folk would meet us. I'd say, "This is my uncle." So, and we joke around that way. But we had a great working relationship. And we've had some really wonderful conversations through the years that we worked together, about 3-4 years that we worked together. And it was one of the best times in my administrative career there in northern part of San Diego. And so I appreciate the time that I had with you, working with you and teaching and learning together. So thank you so much for that time together. And thank you for continuing our relationship now that you have joined the ranks of the retired educators. Congratulations. And so looking forward to this conversation today. We're going to talk about racial relationships and things of that nature. But before we get started, Geof, if you don't mind just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from and how you got into education, things like that.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in San Diego. My parents were divorced when I was pretty little, grew up with my dad. We lived off a Skyline in San Diego and attended Freeze Elementary until 3rd grade, and then moved down to South Bay. My dad was a teacher at Castle Park High School, math teacher, wrestling coach, and then my uncle was a teacher and my father-in-law was a teacher, and I never really thought about being in education. I wasn't the best student. Struggled in school and then after high school, went to Southwestern College. I went to Bonita and went to Southwestern High School across the street for a little bit. And it'd be a nice day, and I go, okay, I'm going to the beach. And so again, not the best student, but got to a point in my life where I was married, had kids. I was working full time for a commercial laundry dry cleaner, that I decided that I wanted to get an education. And so I went back to school. Probably started when I was really starting college when I was 26, and went to Mesa College and San Diego State and got my degree in biology and then started teaching. And really never wanted to be an administrator, and had some things happen along the way that really kind of opened my eyes to making a difference on a larger scale, not just the kids in my classroom. Understood and developed an understanding of what teaching and learning was supposed to really be like, and reflected on what I had done in the past, and saw that that there needed to be a different way to engage adults, so that they engage kids in an inquiry type of a learning process, which gave them a little bit more power and agency inside of a classroom, in terms of developing their own thinking and learning and reasoning, critical skills and stuff like that. So that's how I ended up being an administrator. And so that's where, oh, there we go. I really enjoy my time. It was amazing to work with you, Milton. Really appreciated all the conversations that we were able to have and engage in about kids and school and relationships, and the culture of our country and the world.
Yeah, we had some great times, had some fun times there too. There you are.
I am. More hair than I've ever had.
We had some great times there and working together, and I'm glad that your path led you into administration and that our paths crossed. Not only actually our paths crossed earlier before I started. We worked together at in Mira Mesa at Sandberg, but you were my son's vice principal at Pershing before you went on into the principalship. So just very positive experiences and interactions with you in our professional career as educators. So just appreciate that and glad that our paths crossed in that way. What brought this conversation about is that during our time together, we've had many conversations, but you were one of the, considering all the current affairs that are happening now concerning social justice issues and racial relations, and made me think about conversations that you and I had years ago around race. And I don't even remember how the conversation came about, but you had shared with me that your acknowledgement of white male privilege in our society and things of that nature. And you were the first white person who ever really had that honest conversation with me in my life. I never had anybody have that kind of conversation with me. We kind of skirt around racial conversations, both in the professional realm and things like that, but we actually had a very honest, genuine conversation. And if you wouldn't mind sharing the experience you shared with me regarding a traffic infraction and the comparison to a Black friend of yours during that time.
And I think part of it too is, you know, if I step back just a second, is that okay?
Yeah.
So I think the race issue is like the elephant in the room, and we don't know how to talk about it. I think some people acknowledge it, but they're, you know, it's like they're uncomfortable. It's like, how do you have those conversations? And for me, you know, the development of my understanding about white privilege, you know, I had a San Diego County Office of Education workshop, and I don't know if I share this with you or not, but I think it was led by Glenn Singletary. I'm missing his last name, but you know, it was on diversity, and so we did a survey, and we answered questions, I don't know, 25 questions, and you got either, you know, 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, and then you added up your score at the end, and then you aligned yourself around the room, and it was, you know, I was on the far end on one side, being a white male, blonde, blue-eyed, and then as you went around the room, skin tones got darker, and it really was the first time that I'd ever heard the word white privilege, but it made me think about the experiences in my life and reflect on them, and I knew that I'd had these experiences, but like the elephant in the room, I'd never really talked about it, never really reflected on it, never really dove into it. And so I appreciate being able to have that conversation with you, because it allowed me to be more comfortable with myself and those feelings and the way I was thinking about, you know, some of those experiences. I growing up, you know, and I talked about, you know, going to college and not, you know, and then leaving and going into work. And, you know, I had an experience where I was stopped one time, and I'd been drinking, and, you know, and probably not a significant amount, but enough that the police officer knew that I had been drinking, and he said, "Well, where are you going?" And I go, "Well, I just live around the corner." And you know, and he goes, "Okay, well, make sure you get home, right?" And this was long, you know, this is, you know, not recently, you know. I mean, I think that anybody nowadays at any kind of alcohol level, I think, but around that same time, I had a friend who I went to school with, who was stopped in similar circumstances. You know, and you know, he was dragged out of the car, put in handcuffs, put in the back, you know, and you know, so we got completely different treatments.
And that friend was African American?
He was, yeah.
Black?
Yeah. So the friend, you know, who was Black, and again, you know, super nice guy, super polite, you know, super respectful, the way he approached people, and, you know, and having conversations with people about, you know, what their parents told them. You know, hey, if the police ever stop you, you know, you're a young Black man. If the police stop you, keep your hands on the wheel. Yes, sir. No, sir. Don't make any sudden movements. Don't, you know, if you need to get something out of the glove compartment, tell them my registration's in the glove compartment. You know, and those aren't conversations that I ever had to have with my kids. My dad never had to have those conversations with me about about those things. And so it was things that I took for granted and didn't really realize until, like, you know, you shared an experience of being stopped while driving while black, while you were in, is it Georgia or
Uh-huh.
Carolina?
In
And
Georgia. And
yeah,
in the last couple of months, it's happened right here in Spring Valley.
yeah,
So fortunately, both times here in Spring Valley, Melody, our daughter, and look, we have a young daughter, she was in the car with me. And I think
hmm,
that kind of played a key in how the officer responded, because the last incident just a couple of months ago, he was walking up to the car, and then when he looked up and he saw her in the back seat, his eyes kind of blinked, and then he kind of scrambled to say why he pulled me over. He didn't really have a reason,
yeah,
uh, and then sent me on my way. So I was grateful for that. But yeah, it's happened just recently too, right here in my
yeah,
own community. So
yeah.
mm,
Yeah, it's just, you know, and so, you know, it's one of those things where you know, I think about, and I think about my role, you know, as a principal, you know, as a white male, certain age, wears glasses, has a position where, and I think a lot of the pictures that you showed right there, you know, you don't see me wearing a tie.
mhm.
Uh, and one of the things that, you know, I became aware of is, you know, what does that symbolize? You know, uh, I have my dad, who is actually in a skilled nursing facility right now. When I left to come up to San Diego, he he um, he was found by we have a company coming in called Visiting Angels, and uh, and so he's in skilled nursing. But before we came up here, I met with the owner of that company, AJ, and the woman who's providing care, and both of them are black. And I was at my dad's house, and AJ came in, and you know, and this was, you know, the very beginning of July, probably, I don't know, July 1st or 2nd, and obviously our conversations that we're having as a culture around this, but you know, when he came in, he's younger. He's probably in his early 30s, and so he came in and wearing a, you know, a white shirt and tie. And I go, "Hey, you're dressed up." He goes, "I always dress up." You know, and again, it's made me reflect on that whole notion of how do you have to go around and purposely present yourself if you're a young man of color. Uh, so that people don't judge you. And so we actually had a conversation that as we sat around my dad's kitchen table about it, and, you know, talked about how, you know, his mom had told him, you know, don't walk down the street with your hat sideways and your pants sagging. And he goes, I still think about that if I'm wearing it. He goes, I don't wear a hat while I'm driving in my car. I take my hat off, you know?
Mhm.
Uh, and, uh, and
Yeah,
so, you know,
we were taught, we were told that, you know, you can't be as good as, you have to be better than. So when
right,
you go into an interview, you dress appropriately.
right.
Uh, and even if it's not a formal interview, if you're going to an event where there's possibilities, you make
Yeah,
sure because you only get one chance to give a first impression.
right.
And the caveat is that when we walk into the room, a lot of times, first thing that people see is our skin color, and see that as we're Black man. They don't see our hearts,
Right,
but they see this first. And I
right,
remember I had gotten appointed to another school, and I walked in to the room where the principal and her secretary were. And when I walked in the room, this was the first time it ever happened to me. I walked in and I said, "Hello, I'm Milton Martin. I'm the new vice principal for the site." And the principal looked at me and she said, "Wow, and you're Black." And I didn't know how to
yeah,
respond. I'm like, "What?"
yeah,
Not, "Oh, welcome to our school. Glad
right,
to have you on board." First thing she says to me is, "You're Black." And I really didn't know. Her secretary's face turned red, and we were just, I was just dumbfounded. I never experienced that, but I know that when I walk into a room many times, first thing people see is that I'm a Black man. And I had to tell my son that as well, that you're a brilliant, loving, respectful person, but just know that sometimes when you walk into a room, first thing that people are going to see is that you're a Black man.
Right.
And so you got to make sure that you're always presenting yourself at your best and that you're being respectful, not telling you to be afraid or anything.
Right.
Definitely be confident and be your best self whenever you walk into a room. Because once they get to know you, then this doesn't become as important.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge though, and it's a real conversation that we've had to have.
And there's so many things that I've seen and heard, uh, that make me just go, how do we change this as a society if uh, if that's the perception? And I had a conversation with Lamont Jackson, who was both of our bosses at Sandberg there, who's black, and then another conversation with when I was doing my administrative credential. Uh, one of my colleagues had adopted a African American son, and he talked to one of his friends, and he says, "Hey, as a white male, what do I need to make sure that I teach my son as he's growing up?" And he said, "Well, make sure he always has, tell him that when he goes into a store that he makes sure he has his wallet and always has a receipt, you know." And I shared that with Lamont, and Lamont was like, he shared a story of like being in a Nordstrom's with some friends, and they were all white and he was black, and he realized he didn't have his wallet, and he had this sense of panic. And it's just like, and if that's the way that people feel, how do we change that? How do we change that perception of, somebody walks into a store, oh, they're black. And then the other thing with AJ, who is the owner of the business, Take Care of My Dad, he was talking about a fear that he had, and panic he had when he walked into a store and realized he didn't have his wallet. And so it was, it's just, how do you get that to change?
Yeah, and I think part of it is having these conversations. You've
Right.
had conversations uh, with other African American men, and honest conversations, genuine conversations, and I think that's part of how we bring about that change. As you were speaking too, I was thinking about a time that I took a group of young people out of town for a conference, and we were on our way back to San Diego, and we stopped at a local store, and all of my majority of my young people were African American young people, and I noticed the woman standing at the door. I thought she was a customer, but she was actually the owner, and I realized she was watching my kids, and but they had already started paying. Had I known it right away, I would have told them put everything back. Let's go. But it was just a interesting experience to see that in action. Because growing up in San Diego, in a very diverse community and a diverse school, I really tried my best to see people for who they were. I tried to follow the creed of Dr. King that we judge a person not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And and so growing up, as I got older, is when I started seeing the manifestation of the racism that was around me. I didn't really notice it as a kid because of the way I was brought up in school and church, and things were very supportive. It wasn't until I got older and started noticing it and experiencing it for myself. So it's an interesting journey, but I think the way we bring about that change is having these conversations. Because the other thing that came to my mind as you were talking about the panic in the stores was also just the way people perceive us when they see us. Because when I was principal at another school site, a woman came to visit to do some kind of science thing after school. And it was Friday, casual Fridays. I had on my school t-shirt and my jeans, and the custodian wasn't available to take her to the room to open it up. So I was in the office and I heard her asking for the room, and I just volunteered. I said, "Hey, I'll take her down." And as we're walking down, the first thing she asked me, "So are you the custodian?" Not, "Oh, so what is your job here?" or "Are you one of the teachers?" First thing she assumed is that I'm the custodian. And it didn't dawn on me when I told her I was the principal. Of course, she was shocked, which I always got a lot of shock when I would tell people I was the administrator if they weren't sure, because I've had people walk by me even after I said hello. And they said I was in an office with my nurse at one of my sites. He was a white male, and we were talking. A woman walks in. I say hello. She walks right by me. She specifically says hello to the nurse and keeps on going. I find out that she was there to teach a parenting class on site. So once she got settled, I decided to go into the parenting class. And all the parents, it was for second language learning parents. And so all the parents, when I walked in the room, hey, Senor Martin, hey, and they were all excited. And she was like, oh, who's this? And they told her who I was. And her eyes just, oh, you look too young to be a principal, or you look too young to be an administrator. No, it's something else there. So
You do look young.
yeah, well, yes. But I don't think my age was a factor that day.
Yeah.
So I think it's having these conversations and being honest about it and embracing it and dealing with it, which you chose to do, because some people go to those workshops like you described and don't internalize it, or they'll deny that it's them, that they've had these experiences or they had these feelings. But you were willing to actually embrace it and deal with it and tackle it and start having those conversations with people people that don't look like you, but are like you, because we're all people. And so I appreciate that about you. And you acknowledge that privilege, and that being white in our society has afforded you some opportunities and options that may not have been afforded to others. And so you've already described some of the ways that you've had conversations. And what are some other things that you may have done, or that you think others in your situation might be able to do to bring about positive change in our society? What are some things that they can do to help level the playing field across the board for all people, regardless of our skin color or our racial background?
You know, I go back to that idea of what got me to be an administrator and an inquiry approach. You know, I think recently we've heard of Tulsa and Greenwood, and that was nothing I'd ever heard about, even up until just recently. Mm-hmm. And you know, having conversations with my father-in-law, who's a history teacher, and just asking him, hey, did you teach that in, you know, when you were teaching high school history, or had you ever even heard about it? Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? I mean, I think that, you know, like my brother-in-law, he asked me, you know, and again, it's just like, you know, how do you get people change? But his thing is Black Lives Matter. He goes, what do they want? And, you know, and I go, yeah. They want to live a life where they're treated fairly. They don't want to be judged by the color of their skin. They want to be judged by the character of their, the content of their character, and just the way you described it, and not have to do those things. And you know, so for me to engage in those conversations with people who don't understand or don't choose to work to understand, to make a difference, is like, how do I engage them in an inquiry process? Wow. You know, have you ever had one of these experiences? Have you ever reflected on that? Did anybody ever treat you in such a manner that, again, the questionnaire that we did at the San Diego County Office of Education, where we lined up, and it was you know, it was a palette of skin colors getting darker as you went around the room because of these negative experiences people had growing up and in their daily lives. And mm-hmm. one of the gentlemen I taught with, you know, he was white, and he was in the middle of the other side of the room, and the question was, how did he answer some of his questions? And so, come to find out, he had married a woman who was Hispanic, and so he had experienced some of those things that, you know, being in that relationship, he'd experienced some of those things. And so, again, for me to figure out how do I make a change, and how do I have conversations with people, or what would I suggest, is that inquiry approach, is asking questions. You know, I wonder if you've ever had that experience. I wonder if you've ever seen anyone have that experience. You know, and then sharing your experiences, like, you know, being stopped. You know, why am I being stopped by, why did you stop me? You know, hands on the wheel. Why, you know, and again, it's just, you know, I think that advice our parents your parents, you were given about, have your hands on the wheel, be very polite, be better than.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's all very good advice, but then engage in that conversation about, why are we here? What is this about? Can you explain to me what I was doing? Was it just driving while being black? And again, that's not going to play well probably with people, because
Right.
they're not willing to confront the fact that they have actually just done that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
to
But
me, that's
you make a good point though, Geoff, that you actually are having conversations with people that also look like you around
right,
this issue, because sometimes our individual silence almost affirms the behavior. By
right,
not having that conversation or addressing those things in the moment, or in conversation, just in casual conversation, like when your brother-in-law or with a
yeah,
brother-in-law asks,
yeah,
well, Black Lives Matter, what do they want? Yet actually dialoguing with him and having that conversation and advocating for justice and equality for all people, regardless of their color, but actually having that conversation. Because
right,
in some cases, people would say, I've heard that statement about, well, what do they want? Or they're over exaggerating. That doesn't happen. It does happen, and being willing to at least hear. It's like Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. At least you may not agree with it, but try to get an understanding and be empathetic enough with that person's experience,
right,
so that when you respond better once you understand a person's perspective. And
yeah,
so I think that's huge, that you're having conversations, not just with people that don't look like you, but also having these conversations around race with people that look like you, because that's
right,
important too.
yeah,
That's a huge step, because not
yeah,
everybody's having those conversations. And if they are, sometimes they're not progressive. They perpetuate the status quo. But it sounds
right,
like you're challenging the status quo, which is great. And using that inquiry model, just asking those questions so that they think and they become reflective,
right,
and then they can own it.
yeah. And to me, it's some of the simple things like, did your parents ever tell you that make sure when you leave a store you have a receipt? Did your parents ever tell you make sure that you walk into a store that you have a wallet, that you have money in your pocket? Because if you walk into a store and somehow you don't have money in your pocket, then you're guilty of shoplifting, or
Mm-hmm,
your intent is to steal based on the color of your skin.
mm-hmm,
And I think that those, there are some of those things that, that I was shocked to hear about, shocked to learn that, that people uh, had to talk to their kids about, African American kids about doing those things when it was nothing that I ever even thought about, and I think that that inquiry approach with it is huge,
mm-hmm.
what are the things you taught Nicholas,
We had to
and
have those
again,
conversations about when he started to drive.
right,
We had to have that conversation about if you get pulled over
right.
and things of that nature. And
Yeah. And
yeah, we
and
had to
and
have those.
those are things like, if you asked, if you want, how do the young people, how do they engage other young people who may not understand, or haven't had that experience? I think that those types of questions are good questions to start with, to kind of open up eyes around. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're great with the point about the young people, because that's how the heart work actually came about, is our young people having this conversation and getting to dialogue with one another as they battle these challenges that they're experiencing right now.
yeah.
For those that are watching, Geoff runs a bed. His family runs a bed and breakfast up in Alaska, so he got a lot of business going on right now in there. So pardon that.
So,
We're almost at
so
the close of our conversation.
can we pause for 1 second really quick?
Sure,
Hold on.
let's
Nancy,
pause.
just hang up the phone. Hang up the phone.
All right. Okay, we're back on. All right. So, yeah, we've had the young people actually stimulated this conversation, and I was thinking about, because Nick's been involved, him and a number of our young people have been involved in the protests and communicating with civic leaders and trying to bring about change in policy and so forth. And I was thinking, I was asking them, you know, well, once you guys are finished marching and all of that is done, what's next? And what are you going to do next? Because it can't just stop with a march here and there. What are you guys going to do to bring about quantum change, lasting change, to really bring about equality and justice for all people? So having these conversations were important, and also encouraging them to vote, get out there and vote, and things of that nature. But really, I said you can change policies and you can change rules and things of that nature, but you can't really legislate people's hearts. That's something that has to come from within. And so I think having conversations helps to bring about that change. And that's why I started this, continued the hard work with these conversations, because I think it's important for people to see you and I having this conversation. As far as I'm concerned, you're my brother, as another fellow human being. And as I would jokingly say, hey, this is my Uncle Geof.
Well,
It's because we're people. And I think
that was, people. You know, one of the things that I really appreciated at Sandburg was standing next to you, you know, putting my arm around you, you putting your arm around me. I think that, you know, we had about 650 kids, and I think that our relationship became a role model for how people can interact. And I know that, you know, it was great to be able to engage in that way, you know, and I think, again, it's just the opportunity that we were able to take to show that relationship and to engage like that with each other. You know, how do those experiences from the heart take place publicly so that people are more comfortable doing that?
Definitely. And that's our hope with this program, is that we can help foster and build these conversations. And going to conversation too is these conversations can be uncomfortable. And I think what people have to understand, that discomfort is not a threat. Some people, when they get uncomfortable, they feel threatened, and I feel it's a hostile environment. No, embrace that discomfort, wrestle through it, seek to understand why I'm uncomfortable in this conversation, and then move forward. And I think that will help people kind of center themselves and settle themselves in the conversation, so that real change can come about, so that meaningful relationships can be built, significant relationships can be built, and we can get past the racial thing. And I tell people, I'm not colorblind. I love the fact that we are diverse people. My first, the first program that I've recorded was with my German Irish school teacher, Mrs. Cook. She's 80 something years old now. And she was a part of the civil rights movement, helping with fair housing. She was married to an African-American police officer. I love Mrs. Cook. And it had nothing to do with her being German and Irish, but I didn't ignore the fact that she was a white woman. But I didn't love her because she was white. I just loved her because she loved us. That's really what mattered. But she just happened to be a white woman. But I love the diversity. I'm glad that God created so many people of different colors and races. I think the beauty of our diversity is that we're not a melting pot, but a bouquet. The beautiful thing about a bouquet is you got different flowers giving different fragrances and different colors, and it makes for a beautiful statement. And so I'm not encouraging people to be colorblind. I'm just saying, acknowledge our diversity, celebrate it, embrace it, and respect one another and honor one another as a person. But yeah, I'm glad that we were able to be a model for that. I never thought about it that way until you just mentioned it. But yeah, I'm wondering what seeds were planted into the hearts of the parents and students and faculty that we served for those number of years as they saw us working together and cooperatively. The other thing is, we celebrated the diversity of our campus. That's why in those pictures you can see the flags all around our campus. You made sure that there was a flag representing each culture that was on our campus. And that made for a huge statement that we celebrated the diversity and embraced it, and we worked together. What a wonderful, wonderful statement. All right, so thank you so much, Geof, for taking time out of your day to have this important conversation with us. And I
appreciate,
go ahead.
No, I just, I appreciate the fact that you're doing this. Again, it's so many times we don't take the opportunity to say, how do we have these conversations and see what people think and how they talk. And so I appreciate the fact that you're doing this because, it may be a small step, but it's a step, right? And so every little chink that we can take, it's like you said it, I took the opportunity to engage in a conversation with my brother-in-law who, and if we don't take opportunities frequently, then we're missing the opportunity, right?
Right.
I've always heard that opportunity is like how long, like what's the elevator speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long
Supposed to
am
be
I
like
going to
2
be like
minutes,
if I'm
30
in an
seconds.
elevator with somebody, you're going from the first floor to the fifth floor, I get about 30 or 40 seconds with them. If I had to have that conversation in 30, 40 seconds, what would I say to them,
Mm-hmm.
or what would
Mm-hmm.
I ask them,
Yeah.
and
To leave them
anyways, it's
thinking. I like that.
right. Yeah, leave them thinking, right? So,
Yeah.
so I appreciate you and always have, and your thoughtfulness that you bring to it, and that you're reaching out and having these conversations from your heart,
Thank
because I
you.
think it shows.
Thank you so much. I'm excited about it, and I hope it really brings about change. And as you said, if we each do our little part, and within our sphere of influence, we can make a difference. Just that one conversation you had with me, it made a huge difference in our relationship and just in my perspective of the world itself. I really believe that majority of people have good hearts and want what's best for everyone. And I think if we keep sharing, we'll get there as a society and as a nation and as a world. So thank you so much again for sharing, and I hope it motivates others to have these important dialogues across cultures and within their cultures moving forward. So again, in closing, this is The Heart Work with Marty Martin, celebrating our racial diversity while building and fostering racial harmony, one conversation at a time. I have my special guest, Geof Martin, with me today, my Uncle Geof. You can see the family resemblance, y'all. But I'm glad that he came on board with us today. Thank you so much again, Geof. And thank you for tuning in today. And please like and share this program with others. We're just regular people having serious conversations about things that matter to us all. We know that hard work is hard work, but it's not impossible. So until the next conversation, live in peace and be blessed. Thank you.